Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for this morning's Sutta study with Ayya Soma. So this morning we'll be taking a look at a sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya, and you can find a link to the sutta on our page. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to type them in. So at this time, I'll pass things over to Ayya Soma for today's sutta study.
All right, thank you, Bhante Sumanam, and thank you, friends, for joining us this morning. We can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namassami. So this morning, we're going to read from Anguttara Nikaya 751. That is called Union, but I renamed Transcending Gender. And it's an interesting sutta that when I first read, actually, a few years ago, I didn't really think too much about it. I was kind of actually like, oh, whatever. But as I was rereading this sutta in the past winter retreat, actually this other time, it really made an impact in my mind. And it's so beautiful, actually, when that happens with the Dhamma, because we see that it's not something sometimes, intuitive. Actually, most of the time it's not intuitive. It's very understandable, very clear, very inviting. But sometimes, depending on our different karmic conditions, some passages can seem obscure or perhaps not relevant to our experience. So the attitude that we should have is always, kind of, if we don't understand something, we can put it on the shelf and pick it up later. And when we'll pick it up later, we'll have different insights based on our progress in the path. And so I'll share with you my progresses so far with the understanding of the sutta. So I will start by reading from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, and I believe you have Venerable Sujato's translation. So it's also great. You'll see the different nuances of the Pali language. And the sutta begins. Bhikkhus, I will teach you a Dhamma exposition on union and disengagement. Listen, and I will speak. And what is that Dhamma exposition on union and disengagement? A woman, bhikkhus, attends internally to her feminine faculty, her feminine comportment, her feminine appearance, her feminine aspect, her feminine desire, her feminine voice, her feminine ornamentation. So, since recently I started, somewhat recent, it's been now several months, but monasteries, we have a very different sense of time. It's like recently, a year ago, I started translating from Pali. I'm very fascinated, actually, by the nuances of the Pali language, as I was mentioning earlier. And so it's also very important, in particular in this sutta, to kind of a little bit delve more deeply into what are the actual Pali words that are translated in a particular way. So we see that the sutta begins with what is that Dhamma exposition on union and disengagement. So the words that are used for union and disengagement, and I have here the digital Pali reader, the version in Pali, is samyogo and visamyogo. So samyoga and visamyoga. In samyoga, yoga is basically the word that we use for attachment, and the prefix that makes it fully attached. So it's literally being yoked, literally being bonded, tied. And Visamyoga, on the other hand, is the separation from attachment. So when one is a fully realized being, has done whatever needs to be done in this path, and they're fully detached. So they experience Visamyoga. So we're still in the stage of Samyoga. And the Buddha will expound in this sutta how this attachment manifests with gender identity. And we see here the Buddha starts first with analyzing the female experience. And so he says, the faculties of being female, so feminine quality. And then he goes about with what Venerable Bhikkhu Bali translates as feminine comportment, that the Pali is kutta, which literally means being made up. I love that, being made up. So comportment, in English has this sound of like something, quite real a little bit, like there's a sort of female way of doing things, a comportment. But the Pali connotation of being made up immediately gives us this sense of artificiality, So this behavior that is constructed. And then there is the feminine appearance, which in Pali is akappa, and comes from a plus kappa, which actually means fitting, proper, suitable, but also has the connotation of harness, of trapping. So something that is not exactly particularly comfortable, isn't it? And then there's the feminine aspect from Vida, so the form, the kind, and the desire, that here is the translation used for chanda. We see throughout the suttas that it can have both a wholesome connotation or an unwholesome connotation. Then the voice, that the Pali is sara, so a sound, an intonation too, or an accent. And then lastly, ornamentation, alankara. That comes from alankarati, made too much. Delicious. When I was looking at the dictionary for these words, my mind was experiencing so much Dhammasukha once again because of these the choice of words and this sort of pinpointing to these artificial aspects of gender that we take, though so real. And also, the connotation of how these somewhat come from the outside and that we believe in them. And so it gives us a sense of the delusion. It's a bit of a hint. All of this stuff that is made up, that is a trapping. Yet it creates our sort of state of existence. And continuing with the sutta, the Buddha says, she becomes excited by these and takes delight in them. Excited by them, taking delight in them, she attends externally to a man's masculine faculty, his masculine comportment, his masculine appearance, his masculine aspect, his masculine desire, his masculine voice, his masculine ornamentation. She becomes excited by these and takes delight in them. So the word that is translated as excited comes from rajati. That also means attached. Once again, we see that sort of word running through just a few paragraphs in this sutta. And excited, rata, has the connotation of dyed, colored. Another little artificial sort of experience that we have. And it's so beautiful, actually, how in this phrase we see the process of obsession explained by the Buddha. And how this process of obsession that we think naturally is actually natural in some way. It's actually the product of careless attention. The careless attention, first and foremost, is starting with our own state of existence, with our own experience, and then projecting it also with the outer world. And the sutta continues, excited by them, taking delight in them, she desires union externally, and she also desires the pleasure and joy that arise on account of such union. So here it's obvious how there is a clear meaning also of sexual intercourse. So something that starts from the mind and then wants to conclude in something physical. So the physical union as well as a mental union. And the Buddha proceeds by saying, beings who are delighted with their femininity enter upon union with men. It is in this way that a woman does not transcend her femininity. And so the word transcend here is ativattati, which means going beyond, overcoming, conquering. So right from the beginning, if you've, heard, not studied a little bit of Dhamma up until now, you probably have a bit of an understanding that the work that we're trying to do is to go beyond, to overcome, to conquer. And so we have a sense of how gender actually can be a prison that impedes us to attain Nibbana. And up until now, if you have a bit of a sexist bias, you're probably going to think, oh, these women, also, all their problem. That's why they have all these impediments in the path. But the Buddha is like, no. So he proceeds. A man, bhikkhus, attends internally to his masculine faculty, his masculine comportment, his masculine appearance, his masculine aspect, his masculine desire, his masculine voice, his masculine ornamentation. He becomes excited by these and takes delight in them. Excited by them, taking delight in them, he attends externally to a woman's feminine faculty, her feminine comportment, her feminine appearance, her feminine aspect, her feminine desire, her feminine voice, her feminine ornamentation. He becomes excited by these and takes delight in them. Excited by them, taking delight in them, he desires union externally, and he also desires the pleasure and joy that arise on account of such union. Beings who are delighted with their masculinity enter upon union with women. It is in this way that a man does not transcend his masculinity. So, bad news. If you thought that was a female problem, well, actually, no. It's your problem too. It's a male problem. It's actually just a human problem, really. And it's very interesting, because as the Buddha is talking about all these either feminine qualities or masculine qualities, he actually uses very generic words for it. So it's very important to highlight that. So we see that, he uses comportment, appearance, aspect, desire, voice, ornamentation, but doesn't really exactly, specify what kind of comportment or appearance or aspect or, desire or voice or ornamentation that either genders should somewhat embrace, right? And so that's a good question to ask ourselves. Why is the Buddha not saying, for example, oh, a woman is delighting in skirts and a man is delighting in his new pair of pants, I don't know, or in his hats or shirt, crisp shirt. Why is a woman not delighting in her jewelry and, I don't know, makeup? Why is he not that specific? Well, the answer is quite clear. If you actually just see, for example, the history even of any country, or even today. We live in a globalized world, and wherever you go, you travel, there are different expectations based on gender. So I heard that a lot of Americans don't really leave the country, even before the pandemic. But as a European, you take an hour flight, or sometimes just 5-minute walk, and you're in an entirely different country with people who speak an entirely different language and have different customs, etc. And just traveling and living, moving in different places and being an immigrant in the United States has been a very interesting experience in terms of the expectations from the external world on how I was supposed to act as a female, that are very radically different. Lately, one of our friends from Burma actually made a little post on Facebook of how in Burma there was a little picture of these young people, and she was saying how they were challenging the gender expectations in Burma. And the man was wearing a miniskirt, and the woman was wearing a sarong, which is basically a long skirt. And when I first looked at that picture, I was actually very amused, because that's something that in the West is not really challenging our gender expectations, but in Burma is a big deal. But from our external untrained eye, we actually, most often than not, they are wearing the same thing, we think. They're both wearing sarongs, which are kind of long skirts, a little bit like the ones that us monastics wear underneath the robe. It's just that they have a different type of folding and a different pattern. So for the culture there, it's very obvious that's a female garment and that's a male garment. But for us, we're like, that's a skirt? How are they challenging anything? But, these days we have also so many ideas, for example, concerning makeup or concerning skirts too. That's the domain of females. But look at 19th century, photos or depictions rather of Europe. Those males really liked their makeup and fancy wigs and all sorts of masculine attire of the time. They were in drag 24/7. So we see the arbitrary nature of all these things. actually, I wanted to share with you this. Today I'm in social media mode. So this meme that I read from an Italian-American friend of mine here, and it says, people who didn't grow up in heavily Italian-American communities will never know the pure joy of a Guido coming home from their first trip to the motherland, absolutely red-faced furious about how gay everyone is. When I first read that, being Italian, I was cracking up. And the reason, if you are not quite familiar, is that in Italian-American communities here, that they still have that sense of identity of being Italian, but they have not been in Italy maybe at all. Or in their heritage, it's something that is very far away. They have developed a certain sense of masculinity that is completely detached, completely removed from actually the sense of masculinity back home. And so there actually the sense of machismo, which is present in both communities, both like Italian in Italy and Italian American community, once again has developed in different ways. And here it means embodying certain behaviors, dressing in a particular way that is considered, masculine, perhaps baggy clothing and looking all scruffed up, and perhaps not taking care too much about how you're shaving, or, being rugged and a bit beefy, going to the gym a lot. And then you go to Italy and the hyper masculine men there wear super tight clothing, wake up 3 hours ahead of time in the morning to make sure that their eyebrows are all plucked. They normally have their eyebrows are even more plucked than the females. And they go around, with once again, super tight fitting clothing, very much color matched, going around, how do you say, a braccetto, like arm in arm with other men, kissing other men. We like to kiss in Italy, so like it takes half an hour whenever you meet a group of people. You're like mwah, 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 and it's like across all genders. So I was so amused because I can see how someone who is raised with that sense of this is my Italian masculinity then goes to Italy, and all of a sudden like, oh my God, everybody's gay here. Like, where is this masculinity? Shattered in million pieces. How amusing. I mean, I was horrified from the opposite when I came to this country. I was like, what is this? All these disheveled men and disheveled women too. But then I actually embraced it very quickly. I was like, actually, it's so great. I can go outside in my pajamas. Nobody is going to tell me anything. Oh, how freeing. That's why this is the land of the free. You can go out in your pajamas if you're a woman or a man, doesn't matter. But yeah, so we see, anyway, the reason why I wanted to share this was to highlight how certain things that we think are real are actual mental constructs, and they're dependently arisen. And the only sentient being that I'm aware of that pointed this out in the past, well, actually, since history has been recorded, is the Buddha. We think we are such a progressive society in 2021. What is it? 2021? Yes. I get confused. Sometimes I say 2012, 2008. I don't know. I got it right this time around. 2021. I think we're so progressive, but in reality, actually, we're so backwards. We're so behind. But proceeding with the sutta, the Buddha says, this is how union comes about. And how does disengagement come about? So he, once again, described how samyoga comes about. So how attachment, like full attachment, comes into being. And how does Visamyogam, so this connection from separation, how does that come about? And the Buddha says, a woman, because does not attend internally to her feminine faculty, all the way to her feminine ornamentation. She does not become excited by these or take delight in them. Not excited by them, not taking delight in them. She does not attend externally to a man's masculine faculty, all the way to his masculine ornamentation. She does not become excited by these or take delight in them. Not excited by them, not taking delight in them. She does not desire union externally, nor does she desire the pleasure and joy that arise on account of such union. Beings who are not delighted with their femininity become disengaged from men. It is in this way that a woman transcends her femininity. In other words, stop obsessing about it. To boil it down, in essence. But it's very important that when we talk about anything that concerns our identities, before throwing them out, before disengaging with them, we really, truly, fully need to understand them. So the practice of non-self starts, and by the way, this is a practice of non-self, in case it wasn't clear. The practice of non-self has to start by understanding what the self is. If we think that we can just toss the self without looking at it, what we're doing is actually practicing repression. What we're doing is actually creating an extra layer of delusion, of ignorance on it. So we see that, this is our gender identity is dependently arisen, and we need to understand what are the actual implications for that. So we need to know, learn. And in the same way, we need to learn we need to understand how we identify in every single aspect of our lives. And the Buddhist path is full of directions, instructions that the Buddha has given us to do this work. One of my favorites is actually a later elaboration of this, which is a Mahamudra practice in Mahamudra meditation in Tibetan Buddhism, where we are invited in to ask questions on what we think our mind is like. So not questions to a teacher, there's no right answer, but rather asking ourselves. I remember when Ken Mudralma introduced me to this meditation practice, I was blown away. So she was giving us a guided meditation. What color is the mind? I had never thought about the color of the mind. What color is the mind? What shape do I think my mind is? Is my mind internal or external? Blown away by that. I was like, oh, I never thought of my mind possibly being external, but why not? Why do I think it's internal? Internal to what? Of what? So many things we take for granted. We don't take the time to look at it. And one of my favorite lay teachers that I have not met in real life, unfortunately, but I'm very happy to have found her books, Rita Grass, suggested as an invitation to also add, what gender is my mind? Delicious, delicious practice of contemplating our implicit sort of biases, actually, too, but also opening up the mind to different possibilities. And so once again, understanding when it comes to gender, how we are relating to it and how other people are relating to it, and how these two are interconnected, and how our behaviors. So another important thing that we have to understand in non-self is that nothing belongs to us. Our thoughts do not belong to us. Nothing belongs to us. Our body doesn't belong to us. Our mind doesn't belong to us. And most often than not, our choices do not belong to us. Ooh, I said it. And that's because we're actually not. We're making choices, but without understanding that they're dependently arisen too. We're making choices with the delusion that this is what we want, or this is who we are. For example, we think we want, a Chanel bag. That's why we're making the choice to buy it. Are we really? Have women since the history of time always bought Chanel bags, or men for that matter? No, it was created like 100 years ago, no, 80 years ago. I can't remember, whenever Coco Chanel did that. So clearly, different causes and conditions were put in place in order for that desire to arise, and for a particular group of people to have that aspiration to look in a particular way. Perhaps we think we are shy, or perhaps we think we are very confident. Are we actually shy, or are we actually confident? Well, we're neither. If we're shy or if we're confident, there have been different causes and conditions that have created that result. And expectations on gender, or expectations on race, or expectations on class. So many different things come into being to create that aspiration in the mind, or that identity in the mind. So once we start identifying all of these components, then we can actually truly start making choices. We start identifying the components, and we become free of the components. We don't have to be the shy person. We don't have to be the confident person. We don't have to be the whatever it is, the CEO, to prove to people this and that, or we don't have to do, you name it. But it's very important not to overlook this. Another thing is very important not to overlook the experience of others. So actually, even though perhaps if we have a superficial reading of this sutta, we can think that there are only two sort of ways of being, of the female and male, and the female and male are attracted to the opposite. This sutta is actually the farthest away from being a gender binary, but quite the opposite. It explains, when put through in the sort of in the larger construct of the Buddhist path. So with our good old friend rebirth, that explains everything. All the questions we might have. All of a sudden, when we put rebirth in the mix, actually it stops being a mystery. I remember I was hanging out with my father at the age of 13, way before Buddhism, and he was, sharing some unhappy, like homophobic ideas of, like, he's like, oh, well, it's, against nature for men to date other men. And I was like, Dad, are you attracted to women? And he's like, yes. And I was like, so if tomorrow you wake up and you have a female body, will you just start dating men because you have a female body? And his answer was, that's not possible. So my question to you is, well, Buddhism says it's possible. Actually, it's inevitable. And by the way, it can also happen within this lifetime. One day you have a particular body, one day you have a different body. But also one day you have one mind, the next day you have another mind. And so we tend to think, with the YOLO construct, then nothing makes sense. But with the rebirth construct, everything makes sense. And actually, it's very fascinating also the conversation that is happening these days, well, at least in America, of all the different gender identities. And how perhaps, for example, being gender non-binary or agender is actually a result of Buddhist practice from the past, right? We put so much effort in transcending gender that even though we haven't transcended it altogether, we've made quite a lot of progress. So it's very important actually to see how the Buddhist path not only is not discriminating of LGBTQIA plus identities, but it's welcoming. And when we find discrimination in Buddhism, my understanding of it is not because it's present in the teachings of the Buddha, but rather I think it's because in the past 2,500 years, Buddhists had to coexist with non-Buddhists. And the Buddhists were saying the weirdest stuff all the time. And if you've been to high school and you were a weird kid, you probably remember the times when you wanted to fit in. And you were trying really, really, really hard to fit in. So in a patriarchal world where women have been considered inferior beings for so long, and anything that was even remotely close to a female, so gender identities that were not cis hetero male, of course, were seen as something inferior. And the poor Buddhists were trying to fit so hard in this mold that then started going, okay, well, maybe we should take this from, the Brahmins, we should take this from the Confucianists, we should take this, okay, yeah, we're homophobic too, yes, we're misogynist too, come on, yeah, let's live in peace. And it's actually quite, it's tragic, but also like laughable, because you see the scriptures and there's just a tiny little bit like this that can be, sort of used to oppress people, as opposed to in a lot of other scriptures, there's this little bit that can be used to perhaps say something, pro-feminist. So in other religions, people are really like digging so deeply within their scriptures to try to find something that, for example, does not oppress women. But the majority of feminists are like, well, I mean, seriously, that's a long stretch. But as Buddhists overall, it seems like we're still stuck in time. We're like, no, we still have those like few words here. Let me quote them so I can oppress this group of people. Wait, also this other, well, there's nothing in the text, so let me create it all together and perhaps institutionalize it here in my temple. So I would say perhaps a good invitation is to embrace the incredible teachings of an enlightened being who saw how much rubbish all of this stuff is and how much suffering there is in all this rubbish. So we can all embrace it and throw it out and be welcoming to all of this, because this is actually the proof of rebirth and karma. When we see all these differences in the realm of samsara, Buddhism is the only religion that actually gives an explanation for it. So we should treasure things that actually, are proofs of rebirth, instead of like having to look for different children who have mystical memories from the past, but rather let's get it. Let's be real here. Anyway, so the Buddha then proceeds by saying, a man, because does not attend internally to his masculine faculty, his masculine ornamentation. He does not become excited by these or take delight in them. Not excited by them, not taking delight in them. He does not attend externally to a woman's feminine faculty, all the way to her feminine ornamentation. He does not become excited by these or take delight in them. Not excited by them, not taking delight in them. He does not desire union externally, nor does he desire the pleasure and joy that arise on account of such union. Beings who are not delighted with their masculinity become disengaged from women. It is in this way that a man transcends his masculinity. This is how disengagement comes about. This, bhikkhus, is the Dhamma exposition on union and disengagement. Such beautiful words, but so profound. And actually, I have to say that we can see some of these descriptions also in real life without even having to enter Buddhist circles. The sort of new woke generations. I have to say, I'm always impressed by Generation Z. I think it's Generation Z, Zed. Yeah. As a woman, as an Italian woman, so with our ideas of gender, socialized in that peninsula, who has moved here, it's very interesting to me how people who identify as male relate to me, and how they relate to me depending on the sort of tone of voice that I use, or on how I'm moving, or how I'm saying things, or what I'm saying. And most often than not, it actually goes, I will have a different reaction based on different generations. So I learned that older generations of men, if I speak, well, just like an Italian, actually, really. So very directly, perhaps not softening the voice too much, they will be very uncomfortable. Yet young American men, for example, don't seem to be caring one way or the other. I started observing this because mainly I wasn't quite understanding why people were having such strong reactions to what I was saying. Because in Italy, my mom, I learned, I guess, how to speak from my mom. And she was very direct, and nobody had any problem with that. Italian women are very vocal and not really expected to be sweet. I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh, actually, there's not really, we're not supposed to speak like this and be like, oh, hello, welcome, husband. And no, my mom was like, okay, there's dinner on the table. And it's okay. Go to work, go to school. It's just totally okay within the feminine experience of Italy. But there seems to be a different expectation in this culture that, actually took me several years to even understand that there was an expectation. So I'm a little bit thick. How do you say? Mm-hmm. Thick, yeah. So because my mind tends to go, what's wrong with other people, instead of like, what's wrong with me? So whenever people had strong reactions, I would just go, these people are crazy. But then I was like, oh, actually, it's not that they're crazy. They're having an different expectation. But then the younger the men, the different the reaction. I remember we had this friend, our friend Drager, who was like 23 at the time or something like that. He came on retreat and he put on his application form on gender. It says, do you remember, Bante? It was like, other people identify me as male or something like that. And I was like, oh, look at Drager. And, I think it's because it's such an incredibly lively conversation that these new generations are having, or younger generations are having, that are not even conversations anymore. They're actually a lived experience. Perhaps my generation was having more of these conversations, and the younger the people, the more it's a lived experience, that it's okay not to embrace one particular definition that is told to us from whatever society and different other constructs, that it's actually liberating if we don't obsess with it, if we don't engage with it, if we don't attach to it. And so I would like to end today with still the words of the Buddha, but from a different sutta, the Vasita Sutta, my actual favorite sutta. This one is my favorite sutta. I think so. Anyway, it is today. It's my favorite sutta of the day. And, the Buddha has just explained the differences by birth between different sentient beings. So between different groups of animals, so birds, crawling creatures, etc. And then he comes to humans. And he says, but among humans, there is no difference produced by birth, not by the hair or the head, not by the ears or the eyes, not by the mouth or the nose, not by the lips or the eyebrows, not by the throat or the shoulders, not by the stomach or the back, not by the buttocks or the chest, not by the anus or the genitals, not by the hands or the feet, not by the fingers or the nails, not by the knees or the thighs, not by the collar or the voice. There is no difference produced by birth as it is with other beings. In human bodies, no discrimination can be found. Different human types are spoken of by designation alone. So in other words, don't believe that designation. That designation brings suffering. But understand that designation will lead to the end of suffering. So we can end now.
Thank you, Ayya Soma, for those powerful words of Dhamma and the teaching. And welcome to all our friends joining us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So at this time, if there are any comments or questions, feel free to type them into the live chat and we'll address them as best as we can. Good morning so far to Gita, Nancy, Elaine, Kyle, Jens, Michael, Adine, Joy, Denise. There's a lot of people joining us today. Kevin, Robin, Angela, Nancy, a name that's in Burmese, I believe, that I can't pronounce because I can't read the script. Melissa, and Kevin, a different Kevin, Michael Saw, Steve Lynn, and other friends joining us, as well as all of our viewers on Instagram. So again, if you have questions, feel free to type them in. Let me scroll back up and see what we have. So Michael says, I love the way this sutta treats women and men equally as it cuts to the root of the issue.
All the suttas treat men and women equally. When we think they don't, it's actually our bias or our particular, misunderstandings.
And Nancy says, I wonder also about non-conforming and gender fluidity.
I think I address that later on. But if you have a follow-up question, you're welcome to do it. Yeah, actually, I would say that gender non-conformity and gender fluidity is the intermediate stage to liberation. So you're already like one step further. There's a strong identification to gender. So that's samyoga. And then as we are slowly understanding the flakiness, so to speak, of these constructs and how they are imprisoning us, then we start becoming fluid. We start loosening it up a little bit. Yeah. Until then, we are completely freed.
I think you could reasonably say that the sutta is all about becoming gender non-conforming.
Sadhu.
Because the Buddha here is pointing to how we have these ideas about what it means to be masculine or feminine, but that it's all, again, just cultural constructs. It's just ideas. It's not real. So we're learning how to not believe those stories.
Yeah, thank you, Bante.
I think it was heard.
It was heard? Okay, great. Because we now are technological and have like microphones. So I don't know if people at home can hear. But yes, Bhakti Sudaso was saying how this sutta is all about being gender non-conforming, really.
And Melissa says, is it possible to get a reference for the list of words that you specifically had mentioned to know how to spell them and the definitions?
Yes, absolutely. Send us an email and whoever will read it will forward it to me and I'll send you them. Maybe I'll forward it to myself because I will read it and I will copy the definitions.
And Kevin says, had I come across this sutta early in my practice, I would have left it. But today I'm able to understand the root meaning of this and to be able to hear it in modern language.
Yeah, well, that was actually what happened to me as well. I actually took it as being very the opposite of what it is. So kind of gender conforming. So I thought, okay, well, all right, you think a lot about being female and a lot about being male. And I was like, okay, it's not relevant to me. Next. But once again, I was missing the point. So it's okay to understand that if we don't understand something, most often than not, the problem is actually not of the suttas, but of our mind, of our level of understanding of Dhamma.
And then I have a comment or question. So there can be this tendency to believe that the normal way of things is whatever the status quo is. So let's say identifying as cisgender and male, that's the norm, and everything else is an identity, everything else is a preference, everything else is sort of what people choose, or there's, that's the different or the other. So could you speak a little bit about that? And the sutta does, where it says, well, even the identity that you think is fixed or normal is actually not any different. But how can people work with that? Say someone that reads the sutta and is like, oh yeah, well, that's work that women need to do or work that queer people need to do. But realizing that it's work everyone needs to do.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's important to, in my opinion, analyze what normal is. What do we think is normal and why is that so? Like, where is our definition of normal coming from? And basically, our definition of normal is basically whatever has lasted long enough in our experience, really. For example, in my experience, since I didn't have, growing up in Italy, well, being a daughter of the 80s, having certain rights as a female, for me, gender equality had always happened. It was like, oh yeah, I read on a book that, things were a little bit different before. But yeah, I read in other places in the world that things are a little bit different, but it's just like on the abstract sort of level of the mind. So fundamentally, my experience was, yeah, I can do whatever I want in my life. I can open a bank account, I can purchase a house, I can inherit this, I can inherit that. It's ridiculous now when I think about it. So it's like something that has happened only in the past 40 years, yeah, through the Western world. It's very recent, very recent. There were some rights that actually, even after I was born, they weren't actually there for women. But yeah, since the late 70s, I think in this country, like a woman, for example, can open a bank account without the help of a man. So normal is what has been going on for long enough. And these sort of definitions of normal shift because they're dependently arisen. So the Buddhist path, I would say actually it's more, I would say this work, ironically, is more difficult for those people who think they are normal rather than for the people who think they are not normal. So actually being someone who, even though we're the majority, like, female sex, like is the majority of people in the world, the fact that we are in theory not normal, it's laughable. But as a matter of fact, it should be the most normal thing, right? Like the majority of humans come in the female form. That should be the most normal. Yeah, it's not normal. And then everything that is close to female, once again, is in the domain of not normal. So actually the minority of cisgender males are normal. So you gotta laugh at some side because it's so bizarre. But anyway, it's been a blessing in disguise for me in terms of the Buddhist path, because I would have never asked myself these questions. When it was presented to me, and we'll talk about it actually next week, like that it's bad karma to be a female. I was like, is it really? Like, what? Why? How? And so also in terms of gender, I actually had no idea I was gender non-binary until it just came out, until Buddhist practice. Because it required for me to look at that. And as a lay person, instead, I made choices so that my gender identity didn't have to be a problem. So I was surrounded by people who created a safe space for me, I guess. So I co-created a safe space for myself and others. But when that safe space wasn't there, and it was dependent on conditions. So not truly a happy place, not truly a safe space. In fact, as soon as I left it, I was horrified by, by the whole sort of state of samsara. Then I really had to ask myself these questions. What is normal? What is not normal? What is my experience? What is gender? Why do I identify with this? So I would say that actually, even though it's a work that it's expected for all of us to do, it's expected by the Buddha, actually, for us to do this work. And so the problem is not on the people who are doing the work. The problem is the people who are not doing the work, the people who think they're normal. And they're basically doing what is described here in this sutta, obsessing so much with their masculinity, obsessing so much with their traits that then they think it's something solid, that is who they are, that is something precious to be treasured. And from there, they make so many misdeeds. from there, from that conceit of superiority, they start oppressing people. And that is the bad karma, bad action that leads to unwholesome results. So yeah, if you think you're normal, better do the work. Go and work.
Thank you.
I hope that answered the reflection.
Yes, very much. And welcome to Bhante Varapanyo, who's joining us.
Hello, Venerable.
And Kevin says, thanks for explaining relative truth and absolute truth with important examples. And Nancy says, this is amazing. Thank you. I'm so grateful to be learning from you. And Michael says, but isn't gender just another way to build a self? I like, I don't like, I hate, no me, no mine renders it irrelevant. What the gender and the preference might be, it's just another attachment.
I mean, yeah, gender is an attachment, but you need to learn what your attachments are. Otherwise, what are you throwing away? You're not throwing away anything. You're actually reinforcing it. So we don't go about the world, pretending that, actually, what we do is we go about the world, especially the majority of Buddhist practitioners, when they encounter these beautiful concepts, then they start, pretending that they're already enlightened, that they've already done the work. But it's not like that. We need to understand the First Noble Truth. There is suffering. What does that mean? How does it manifest inside the mind? We don't go to the end of suffering or the antidote if we don't know what we're curing. Do you think they created a vaccine from coronavirus without studying the coronavirus? It's impossible. You have to understand what the disease is. You have to look at what the disease is in order to understand what the antidote for it is. So, yeah. Actually dismissing your gender identity, dismissing your sexual preferences, dismissing all of that does the opposite of non-attachment, reinforces them over and over again. And you won't be able to remove something that is, you don't even know how it manifests, what role it plays in your life. But once again, that's why I think it's actually a privileged situation to be told all the time that you have to do the work of working with it. It's a privileged situation, because then the majority of people, on the other hand, when they think they're normal, they're just sitting there like, oh yeah, I'm already detached. No, you're not. You just have no idea it's there.
And Gita says, Ayya, I've heard it said in certain Deva and Brahma worlds, there's no gender identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're having a great. Yeah, that's why it's really good karma, to be reborn in a Deva realm. And it means also in certain Deva realms, like it's the direct, actually, consequence of meditative attainments. So yeah, you're like, really, that attachment to gender, it's like so 2000 and late. I have better things to delight my mind with. I mean, there's still, of course, we have to remember that we have to go further. We have to be really ambitious with this path.
And Kevin says, as a trans Buddhist, I believe it's important to fully accept our gender before we can start to learn to let it go. It's true, it's all just a body and impermanent, but we still live in the relative world where many genders are harassed and oppressed and even killed.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much for pointing that out. And once again, it is very important also if we don't, or if we think actually that we are normal, because by the way, nobody's normal. Very important to highlight that. But if we have that delusion of being normal, it's, as Buddhist practitioners, it's first and foremost our duty to practice compassion and caring for others who, like Kevin mentioned, are constantly at risk of danger and harm from other unenlightened beings. So yeah, instead of telling people to, do unenlightened things, because we're an unenlightened person telling another unenlightened person to do unenlightened things, perhaps we should just shut up and be there and care and practice compassion and practice kindness. And that's what being a Buddhist means, not just, repeating cliff notes on non-self from one book that we picked up at the library. I don't know.
And Michael says, may all beings be happy, well, free of suffering, regardless of the bodies they inhabit.
Sadhu.
And Gita and a bunch of others are thanking you for your words of wisdom. Oop. So a lot of things popped up. And Brittany says thank you.
Oh, good to see you.
And Venerable Chanda also.
Oh, Venerable Chanda, good to see
Good to see you,
you.
Venerable.
Becomes more and more intimidating as my senior bhikkhunis are showing up.
And Adrian says it's good to, let me see. Sorry, this thing is a bit unwieldy. Okay. Melissa says, brilliant and love the reflection of the current release and redefinitions of gender and getting back to the Buddha's teachings. The new generations make me smile.
Yeah. Yeah, but how incredible is the Buddha mind. The more I reflect on these passages, the more actually my faith strengthens in the Buddha, to see how incredibly impermeable to cultural conditioning he was, and how it's difficult for us that we live in a society that is a lot more quote unquote progressive, whatever that means, in the way that a lot of these things are more socially acceptable than 2,500 years ago. How we have so many more obstructions on the path and of understanding what gender really means. And the Buddha was immediately like, okay, let me explain it to you in very few words.
And Aurora says, I remember a sutta where the Buddha speaks about different types of wives, one like a mother, another like a sister. I don't remember anything similar about husbands. Do you know if there is one?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, but actually what comes to mind is how the Buddha recommends actually working with sexual attraction. But, regardless of whether it's a woman or a man, it's very important to understand that the Dharma is universal. So not getting too hung up with once again, the gender of people. Just imagine if he said, oh, if there's a person with blue eyes and you don't have blue eyes, and you're like, oh, only the people with blue eyes, this only men. Then I think in this room, it would only apply to Gunnar and Bhante Sudarsana. True, do you have blue eyes? Hazel. Sorry, that Italian gene messed it up. So only Gunnar and Bhante Sudarsana can listen to certain teachings because they're the only ones with blue eyes. It's just characteristics. Or the fact that the Buddha is speaking to Indian people. Well, he was in India. So then if we're not Indians, it doesn't apply to us. So this is once again a reflection of how we put ourselves too much importance on gender. And how if it's said by a woman or a man, that it plays such a huge impact on how relatable it is for us. It is to us. So we should do that exercise of not taking the Dhamma in that way, and also paying close attention to the fact that translations are not accurate representations most of the time of the gender that is expressed in the suttas. So especially in English, since English has a different way of different grammar than Indo-European languages, a lot of times the masculine, when we hear, for example, bhikkhus, so monks or whatever, we tend to think that the Buddha is only talking to male people. But actually that's the masculine gender of the grammar, the grammatical masculine gender that is used, for example, in Italian. I have two brothers. So when speaking about us in the language, if we're all together, we wouldn't say siblings. There's not such a word. We would say brothers. Oh, these brothers together. So it's the plural is the masculine gender.
Masculine is gender inclusive.
Masculine is gender inclusive. Thank you so much, Bhante Sudhaso, for helping me with my ESL. Yeah, so a lot of times in English, once again, we tend to think in that gender binary way, but actually it's not. It's the Buddha is talking to everyone.
And lots of other thank yous, and also Ayya Vimalanyani joining in. So I think we have 3 venerables today for Ayya Soma's talk. And
well, because us bhikkhunis, I mean, they bombard us with this gender thing. You know, if you don't, it's actually kind of funny. I became more aware of my gender when I entered the Buddhist path. You know, people, the ones who are trying to spiritual bypass, tell you like, oh yeah, you should like forget about gender, forget about that. And I'm like, yeah, I came here like with no problem with gender, but y'all seem to have a big crazy, you know, idea of what this gender is. So maybe the work is once again the work that needs to be done by the so-called normal people who have quite a strong attachment to this gender situation. I was totally fine. You know, I used to work in the editorial field in fashion. You know, I could wear makeup or not, or I could like date a woman one day, a man the other day, a transgender person the next day. Nobody cared. I could actually, the only straight man in the office was our secretary. I was like, I had no idea of what the expectations were from me. And when I came, you know, I started Buddhist Insights with Bhante Sudhaso, and it was actually like my idea to start this organization. And the first thing that was asked to me was like, oh, when did Bhante Sudhaso ask you to do to come and work for Buddhist Insights? I remember going like, what? What is their problem? And this was over and over again, right? And at the very beginning, once again, my experience was more, these people are all insane. And then I was like, oh, these people are really insane they're really attached to my gender. They're really attached to the shape and form in which my body comes from. And from that, they have all these ideas and preconceived expectations that I am, you know, the waitress and cleaning lady of Bhante Sudhaso. That's where it's coming from. It has nothing to do with me. That was a bit big of a release of suffering, you know, because I was a bit arrogant. So I was like, why? Like, must be something to do with me that they think. I am not capable of thinking. Hurt, you know, right through the heart. But then I realized that had nothing to do with me. It just had to do with this form, with rupa, and their expectations on the rupa. So once again, I would say that the work needs to be done by the normal people who are very attached to this concept of gender. And as bhikkhunis, yes, of course, we're told over and over again, we're treated in a particular way. So you have to ask these questions to yourself, otherwise you're going to go insane.
thank you. And the final question seems to be from Kevin, who says, I heard several times that there is a sutta where a person wakes up in a new gender. Are you aware of this sutta?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually in the Vinaya, right? Yeah, it's totally normal. Welcome to the new normal.
Well, thank you everyone for joining in, for all of your comments and questions and attentive listening. So it's this evening. We'll be back at 7:30 p.m. New York City time with some meditation and some more words of Dhamma. So join us then if you can. But for today, we can close with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And enjoy the rest of your day.